Hey there, it's Linda from Lányos Handmade, and today we are going to sew up the coffee purse. These are just little purses that have one, two, three pockets in them. Throw some change in, zip them up. You could use them for cash or cards, but they're quite handy. Fit in your pocket, fit in your bag, anything you'd like. I don't think there's anything too terribly special, I have to tell you. One thing I will say is I've put the links for all the hardware that I've used. This one's Rainbow from RC Threadcraft. This one, for those scrapbusters, I just had an embroidered patch and I made a coffee purse out of it because it basically uses up your scraps. This was even a number 3 zipper on here. These are number 5 zippers. I prefer the number 5 because it gives me more space in here. And the number 3s are a bit tighter. So you can see the difference there. They give you more room so that you can stuff them more. What else can I pass on here? But the only thing you should practice if you're a beginner sewist is sewing zippers on a curve. So start out with fabric, practice sewing on a curve, then practice sewing a zipper on a curve, you know. Take a few shots at it before you start on your actual coffee purse. THCG Supply does vinyl cut and sew for this. So you can buy the cut pieces already. Well, they're not cut already, but they're drawn out on vinyl. And then you can cut them out and sew them together with any print that you like. She would probably print it off for you because she's that accommodating. I'll put her link below for the cut and sew product. I would suggest that, you watch your layers, pay attention to how many layers you can sew through. If you can't sew through all these final layers, you can hand sew your pockets to the bottom, and you can hand sew them to the inner layer too. So if you're worried about the thickness in your machine, there are hand sewing options for it too. So I don't know what else I have to mention to you, except it's a great scrap buster and it's free in the Lányos Handmade Pattern Party group for members. So I'll leave the link below and check out the videos, see if you like it. Come on over and pick yourself up one. Okay, before I start into anything, let's see if I can get this zipper jig thing to work. I've got my little piece on. It's just being held on by the post that's standing out here. And it's on backwards, so it's facing me backwards. And my zipper tape is going to go on backwards too. Little flip-floppy stuff here. Slide both of them in at the same time. I've got a ruffly edge here on one of them, so we'll see if it works. Oh, it did work. Well, that was easy enough. There, it's on. I'll fold this up and put it away for next time. So we have a very large zipper. There's my label. This is going to be the large piece that makes the dividers inside. I need a couple of pieces of something strong. This is Peltex. I'm not sure what you're using. I know some heavy Decoville, however you pronounce it, works. This is my lining pieces, and this is my outer pieces. And I was so happy to find more of this fabric. It's got a bit of a shine to it, a gold shine, and I just love it. So let's prep our pieces. These are our 2 outer pieces, and I've got my double-sided tape inside the seam allowance. And I've drawn the seam allowance on this side. It'll help us later. I could draw it on this side too, but it's not going to show up very well with the black. I'm going to try my marker and see if this one works. It might not show up, and it might be, a little bit too permanent. So I'm going to test it out on a separate piece of fabric, just in case. And then when we put on our zipper, we're going to make sure that it's just along the edge here. We don't want it to be at the edge of the fabric. We want it in just a little bit. And we're going to sew it on with our zipper foot. And then that way, when this seam ends up sewn here, we'll have lots of zipper tape exposed. We don't want to put it right up against the edge of the fabric because then we'll have less zipper tape exposed. And it helps to have as much exposed as you can because then it makes the little wallet wider. So I'm going to give this a tug, pull this off, and place my zipper tape all around. When it comes to the corners, you might want to stick a little clip in it. It's always a little tricky, but it's the best thing you can do because some zipper tapes fall apart when they've been snipped. This one is a pretty good tape though, so it's a nice weave, and if I stick maybe about 3 or 4 clips in it, I can get around the corner easier because it won't curl up, right? It'll open up nicely, and then I can sew it down. So be careful with your zipper tape too. Make sure it's one you have experience with. So I'm going to place this all the way around and stick it down. And we will have some left over, but we'll deal with that afterwards. I just want to make sure we've got good maneuverability with it. So let's start pulling some double-sided tape off and placing this down. Now you can see I've sewed it on. I did some back stitching, and that's a real small seam allowance, but it'll be good. And it's a little bit of clips here you can see on the edges, just a few, just to get it to lie flat, because that way when I came around the corner here, I could keep it down and sew through. You'll notice on the other side where my line is, it's not quite the proper seam allowance, but that's okay because we're going to be sticking the lining layer on here too, and we can follow this for the lining layer. But first, let's get this other side put on. So we're going to do the exact same thing. I'm not going to separate this zipper until after I line this up so that I make sure it's perfectly lined up. So we're going to pull off our tape here just a little bit. And we're going to make sure this is lined up nicely here at the bottom. That's why we don't want to separate our zipper. Obviously, I have to pull it back a bit here. It's not quite right. A little short. There, about there. And let's make sure it's lined up. If you want, you can even use some clips or pins to hold it together as you go around to the other side so that we can make sure that this is right on the proper spot. And I don't have any clips in my curves yet. So when I come around, just little itsy bitsy ones, because it's a very narrow seam allowance anyway. And once we get the zipper in, then it's going to be easy sailing for the rest of it. So just get your zipper around the corner. Oh, forgot to take my tape off. If you need some tape in the corners, do that too. I don't have any on the corners of this. So let's just go around here. More snips. Sorry, I think I hit the table. See which end comes off easier. And then after you get it down, check and see how it's lined up here too, because we don't want it too far out. I see it's a bit crooked on this side, so I'm going to pull it down, reposition it, and pull it down. Because we want it to be the same here as it is here with these layers. Where did my double-sided tape go? I think I pulled it off. Yes, it's getting stuck all over the place here. There, that's a better fit. So now I'm going to sew around like I did here. Here too. Now I finished sewing both sides onto my outer layer. You'll notice here I fell off. So no problem. I just backed up, went back to here, and started again. Nobody's going to see anything that's inside there anyway, so don't worry about it. Now, the other thing I did was I sewed it with the zipper 2 halves attached still. You can sew it with the zipper not attached if you like. And I also pinned this so I could line it up perfectly because I wanted to make sure it was lined up. And I forgot to say, I think I forgot to say that the center marks, I made sure they were lined up too, because we really want to get these 2 halves to be perfect. And if, you know, it didn't work the first time you tried, you know, do it again, because this is going to be sewn later and we want it to match. So let's get this zipper open and we'll work on our next step. I could have sewed it with the zipper open too, but you know, it's up to you. Now you'll notice I don't have a zipper stop on here, so I'm going to put the zipper stop on here before something terrible happens. I'm not putting it on this end because we're going to be working with it open, but I will put one right here just in case. So now, what's the next thing to do? So I got to remind myself, don't forget that zipper stop. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to put our lining layer on. And our lining layer matches up with this very nicely too. You can use pins if it's fabric, which actually, you know, it's easier to use fabric when using this pattern the first time around. So you can pin it all on, all the way around. Make sure this is pressed in nicely, this corner. And as you're sewing, you might want to check to make sure your zipper is nicely lying flat. This will help it sit again. And you can sew on your seam allowance if you like. You could sew close to it too. The seam allowance here is kind of arbitrary. It's not going to hurt you if you're off the line a little bit. So this is going to be all pinned down nicely. I'm going to pin it and check it, make sure it's not crinkled as I go around and pin. So let's just get our pins here and we'll pin all the way around. So now that it's all pinned on, remember, you can line up your centers. Don't sew past this stop sewing line, and you can do your as close to your seam allowance as possible. Don't worry if you can't make it because there is a zipper here, right? So just get it as close to your seam allowance as you can. There is a guideline on the other side, but you know, if you can't make it, don't worry about it. Oh, and I really have to put a zipper stop in here because I don't want to lose my zipper off the end. Okay, I've got one side sewed on. You'll see I left some space here. Don't sew right to the end. I've got my zipper stopped so my pull doesn't fall off, and I've sewed around. I pinned down the other side now, and I can sew around it too and stay out of the bottom seam allowance. And you can use centers to help you match this up, but you'll see when it's finished how important it is to make sure that everything is lined up nicely, because this is all going to be closed and we don't want it lopsided. We want it to be nice and straight. So that's the best way to get success with this one, is make sure that this is lined up with this and this is lined up perfectly with the 2 outer layers together, right? So everything has to be lined up on this seam and on these edges. So I guess I can go sew this other side, and then I'll come back and show you how it looks. I think I'm going to trim down these edges afterwards so it's not as thick inside, but let's sew this first. Okay, both sides sewn, and that's probably the hardest thing you'll ever have to do with this pattern is sew those zippers in. Both sides are sewn up good. Oh, there's a big thread hanging off of here. Well, let's clean that up. And I did not really trim this down too much, but I did even it out nicely so that when I turn it, maybe it'll look better. And so now let's turn. If you see some of this from your last row, check to see if you didn't go too close and maybe miss the zipper a bit. You might want to go over that side again, but I can see it's attached to the zipper. It's just one seam was sewn in a bit more. So just for appearance's sake, if you think that your zipper is actually attached well, you can use your seam ripper and get rid of these stitches. They would be like basting stitches almost, right? Just holding your zipper in. If you check and your zipper is really close to the edge and maybe not being held on, you can just sew one more row of stitches just to make sure your zipper was caught. Okay, so I'm going to push it all out and see how it looks. It looks like the whole thing all the way around. See, now that's exactly what I was talking about. So I will sew one more time around and make sure I'm just a little bit more over because I want to have the zipper completely covered. Okay, so with this one I'm not going to turn out yet. I'm just going to sew around one more time. And then when I turn around one more time, I will catch everything. And it'll look nicer and be held on better. So I'll go do that, sew it one more time, and I'll come back and show you. There, now I sewed a second row. You can see it there. Just to make sure, just a little bit in from the first row. Like I said, this seam allowance is a bit arbitrary, but you really want to make sure that you catch. So now let's turn it inside out here, inside in. And we can check it again, and it looks good, and it's nice and wide. And I'm going to go press it just a little bit, just to get it used to lying down flat. And don't press your zipper teeth because sometimes they're susceptible to melting. You don't want that. So this is in good too. If you see any little stitches left over now, you can pick them out. But I think I sewed well enough that I got rid of them. This one on the bottom, I think might not show. But check it. Oh, there's a little bit. So I'll take out about 5 stitches here. And make sure on the inside that I did catch. You want to see that zipper inside here in the corner, that it's actually caught. Yep. Okay, so I'm going to go press this and I'll come back and we'll show you the next step. Okay, I have pressed these very nicely with my iron. I had a moment of panic because my iron was dirty and something got on here, but I managed to use a wipe to get it off. And I cleaned the iron thoroughly, so hopefully that won't happen again. Now we put these 2 pieces together, match the centers up, because we're going to sew them together. And make sure you get, I don't know if your material is stretching, make sure you get almost exactly matching up the 2 of them here so it'll look nicer. So I'm just going to pin across here, move this out of the way, that's bugging me. And I can see where I'm supposed to match these up. We do sew across here with our seam allowance. I'm going to get that out of the way too. And this is why it works with directional fabric too, because you can have your one going this way, this would be the head top, and your other side going this way, this is the head, the top. So I'm just going to sew this across here so it stays together so I don't have to think about it anymore, and then I'll put it aside for a while. There, I sewed it together. You can't sew over top of this, but you can get as close as you can. And over on this side, the same thing. You don't have to sew over the top of the teeth, but you can get as close as you can. And it's lined up nicely. And now I can stuff this in. And when I stuff it in, I'm going to put it between the outer layer and the lining layer. And I'm going to try and get that seam allowance either on one side or the other, because if you don't, it's just going to end up too bumpy. So I'm just going to slide it in here and make sure it's maybe the seam allowance is underneath it so that I don't get it all bumpy inside. And if your little interfacing piece here, whatever you're using, doesn't fit, you can always take it out and trim it off. We do want to make sure that it's clear of this seam allowance here, because we're going to have to sew things together down at the bottom. But for now, this looks pretty good, especially on this side. And then this will pull out like this. That'll tuck in. And we'll have our nice little zipper. So I'm going to stuff this in here, and then I'm going to move on to the next step, which I think means pressing my divider according to the instructions. And I did carefully press my seam allowance open. I wish I had one of those little stick irons. I could just flatten it out, but I don't. So don't melt your teeth if you do have a big iron like me. And I did flatten out this zipper inside too. It flattens out pretty easy on this side because it's connected, but this side it's kind of bumpy, but that's okay. It'll work out in the end. So everything is nice and flat inside now, because it's going to be sewed up eventually. But let's just get it like this so it gets used to the way it's supposed to be. Let's move on to our divider pieces now. I've got this lovely fabric here, and I have to go press it according to the instructions. Okay, now I've got my little guidelines pressed in. I folded it this way and pressed it, and then I folded it this way and pressed it. And I opened it up and I drew that line in just as another guideline. Now I'm going to put my label on here nicely. So now we have our label on. So let's put our seam together. There, I'm going to sew this together. So we've sewed our seam and pressed it. And we fold it down again. And I even pressed it again along this top edge here to make sure it stayed. And then we match up this seam allowance with our center point here that we had. Match up this little seam here. And flatten it out. And let's pin it. Oh, pretty the way the feather landed. You can press it again if you want to make sure along these edges, because we're going to edge stitch right here. And when you're sewing, remember too, there is also a stop sewing line here. You don't have to go all the way down to the bottom. And we can always, if you make a mistake, pick those last few stitches out afterwards. But it's easier just not to put them in the first place. It just helps you when you're turning things and inserting things that you have something smooth here. No top stitching to bunch it up. So the next thing we're going to do is turn this inside out. And I'm going to go press it again because it helps with my little measurements. I'm going to press this flat. And the only reason I'm turning it so much is because I want to have this like a V. Because now we're going to put this here and just measure an inch in. And we can clip it. On this end too. And then we can press this and edge stitch this edge all the way down. Well, actually not all the way down, because remember we've got the stop sewing line down at the bottom here where the raw edge is. So we're just going to edge stitch to the stop sewing line. And then after we do this side, we'll do the same on this side. So I will sew these 4 down and stay out of the stop sewing line and press it, and I'll come back and show you what it looks like, but it's going to be a cute little thing like that. So now we've sewed it nicely, and you can see it's shaped like a nice little accordion. Now we want to lie flat and be able to put it into our little coffee purse. The only problem is this is attached here, right? We have our 1/2 inch marked. This is where we're going to fold it up and bend it up and make sure it fits inside. But these little things here are in the way. So I'm going to snip right along that just a little bit, just so it separates. Right along that line. And we didn't sew to the bottom, so it'll be easy to snip this open just a little bit, just up to the seam allowance line that we're going to put in. So I'm going to get this way so I can cut properly and stick a little cut in here. And we're not going past our stop sewing line. Oh, that one's crooked. Crooked bugs me. And then we'll do one on this side too. Let's sew along that stitching line. And now that it's sewn, you can see that you can open it up. And this is the part where you snipped. So you could separate these two. And I'm going to go press these up really well, because after I finish with that, the thickness will be distributed equally on one side and the other. And your little dividers can pretty much stand up on their own. So now that I've got this pressed, it stands up pretty well almost on its own. I'm going to put it into the wallet. One side is going to tuck in one under here, and the other side's going to tuck in here. And when you're doing it, there's a center seam here and a center seam here, and we're going to line this up with the center seam so it doesn't go too far one way or the other. So we're going to tuck it in so that it's right on the center seam. And then stick it underneath and sew it down. We'll only do one side at a time. So I've got this pressed here, and I can tuck this in. And don't go too far one way or the other. Just make sure it's in the right spot. You can always check so that the center seam is right here. Looks like I'm drifting on one side. But that's pretty close right there. And then you'll have enough to be able to sew it down right here. Let's get this pinned in here. There's that on the center seam. Yep. I think I'll put this side, pin it in too, and then I'll be able to see if it's pulling one way or the other. It's okay if these come up a little bit. There's a little bit of tension in there. This way we can test it out. How does that look? Maybe a little bit more on this side. I think I just bent my pin. So remember, you can have different colored threads. You can have yellow on the top because it won't be as noticeable. And you can have black on the bottom in the bobbin because it won't be as noticeable. And make sure you catch, when you're sewing along the edge stitch here, that you catch this piece on both sides. If it's centered, you shouldn't have too much problem. So I'm going to sew down this side and down this side, and I'll come back and show you what it looks like. There, now I've sewed it down on this side, and I've sewed it on this side in black so you could see. But if I did it yellow on this side and black on that side, thread, you would hardly even notice the black down there. So make sure, double check that your ends here of your dividers, the raw edge, is trapped inside here. We already know it's sewed shut because we did this seam and sewed it shut, but we really don't want any raw edges falling out, and I can feel my raw edge right along here. So you've got just enough room to tuck your raw edge inside. So now we're going to close this up just a little bit so it can get used to it. Well, I think I've squished it enough. Now let's slightly open it up because we want to know where these edges fall, because we're going to pin them to the side here and sew them down. Make sure you straighten them out. Center them between the two. That's nice and flat here. This is supposed to be flat and tight. And this is this side. And then to secure the other side, I usually just close it up a little bit and fiddle around with it again. And then carefully see where it lands. Flatten it out a little bit. Pin it down. Make sure it's a bit flat there, right? You don't want it, it looks like it's gaping on one side more than the other. I'm just going to even it up a bit, pull this tight. Nice and even on both ends here. This side too. Just a little bit of gaping on here. And an opening in the middle. Yeah, that feels good. Now, the next thing we're going to do is stick this in our machine and edge stitch it to the back. Now with this one, I'd have black thread on top and black on the bottom. And you don't have to go all the way down to the bottom, you know, just as far as you can go right there on all four edges, just as far as you can go. It'll probably be easier to do one side than the other. And your last one will be pretty tight, but just do it as far as you can go. The other thing you can do is you can hand sew it along here. that's your choice. So if your machine doesn't go down in there, you can hand sew these 4 edges down. And then after that's done, you'll be finished. And we edge stitch these little corners along here. You'll notice on this one I got down about 1.5 inches. This one was about 1 inch. This other one, oh, this one went really far down. It's about 1.5 inches. That's about 1.5 inches. So it just depends on your angle. It helps when you're sewing. I don't know how to turn this so you can see. It helps when you're sewing. If you can pull this up and start here and sew that way and back stitch. And then same. Oh, loose thread. I have to catch that. So you are finished. Remember I said the comment about the colors too. I use black here. Nobody sees it. Black here. You kind of see it, but you don't really see it. So this is a really good pattern for something that's a print, because then you're so busy looking at the print that you don't notice the sewing that's holding things together. Okay, so let's close it up and we're ready to go. So how'd that go? Make sure you show me what you've made. I'd love to see. You can leave your comments here, or you can leave your comments in the Lányos Handmade Pattern Party group. And show me some photos. Let me see what you're working on. I've left all the links below, so make sure you check us out. And thanks for watching, and we'll see you again next time.